My name's David Zagan. I'm 21 years law enforcement now. Um, I started off just like everybody else as a uniform patrol officer. Then I moved my way up to where I ended up specializing in interviews and interrogations and then became a polygrapher. I met my wife, who made a whole lot more money than I did, and we moved to the Atlanta metro area. And I went from being in CID at that's the Criminal Investigation Division at that last agency and specializing in that stuff I just mentioned, to um, becoming a persons detective, which basically was a general term for investigating anything that happens like bad to people, which included robberies, homicides, sexual assault, stuff like that. I was able to continue uh, my interviews and interrogation stuff for a while, and I still get brought out of semi-retirement, I guess you could say, for larger cases. But while doing all of that and getting called out every other night for those horrible type cases, I ended up meeting my current lab partner, who is a he always knew he wanted to do this. So crime scene was his passion, his life since he was even a child. And one day an opening uh, came available, and I applied for it, and I quickly found out that I should have been doing that all along, because they allow you to research, study, continuing education, and it just became a, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. So now, only 10 and a half years into crime scene now, I have gotten my crime scene certification. I'm a certified latent fingerprint examiner. I've been to the National Forensics Academy. I actually went back for a while as an adjunct instructor to help teach fingerprint processing and latent fingerprints, different types of things with latent fingerprints. Then COVID came, and when everybody recovered from being able to actually go back to the classroom, it turns out that one of my big time instructors actually went up and filled a full time position up there. So now I don't get to go up there and help teach anymore because my instructor is now the instructor. Um, but I got to go there. I got to learn a lot and do a lot of things. And I've always kind of had a Bigfoot, it kind of grew organically where, you're like, oh, I go camping. I was a turkey hunter and a deer hunter for a while, which I no longer do. Um, but I got to spend a lot of time in the woods, and I have a sergeant friend of mine who's now retired who was big into Bigfoot, and sitting around the campfires talking about things, talking about the strange things that we've all encountered in the woods at night, swapping stories, and it just kind of grew from there. And then one day I was sitting at my desk and I was thinking about all the different impressions that I'm now studying about how to, well, lately been specializing rather in how to, and continuing study, of course, but how to understand the distortion of when these friction ridges or when the hand or the foot, makes its deposition mark on whatever surface it's hitting. Trying to understand the distortion and what happens when it actually makes its mark. And on a whim, I decided to scroll. I'm Google searching different types of supposed Bigfoot impressions and thinking, maybe I can find something, maybe I can see something that somebody else hasn't. Because when you try to research what research has possibly been done on Bigfoot impressions as far as their dermal ridges go, there's not really a lot out there. There's a lot of people writing about it and making a lot of huge assumptions without actually showing their work or showing their research, um, which is what I'm about. And what I ended up finding was I saw a few impressions, like badly taken pictures from the wrong kinds of angles that caught my attention. And what ended up happening was I started thinking, what if I'm actually looking at real evidence and it just hasn't been documented properly? And what ends up happening is people like me in the forensics field, we look at it and go, not good enough, and we just keep scrolling. But I was thinking about how many times there was a possibility of someone like me who may have taken an interest and kept scrolling because it wasn't documented properly. And that's pretty much how this whole thing started. I decided I wanted to reach out and help because I still have this full-time job, but if I could reach out and help people understand how to document these things properly, then maybe one day I get to see some of that evidence come across my desk and I get to go, oh, wow. Um, so that's how it started. I do have some big name people who send me casts with supposed dermal ridges on them, and they're letting me analyze them, and I provide actual forensic reports for them and send them back. So that's kind of what I've been doing in my spare time. And just recently, with in keeping trying to help teach people, I just released that book, Casting Bigfoot Evidence, on how to cast different types of footwear or foot impressions in different types of soils and substrates. So that's pretty much where I'm at right now.
Hi, I'm Linda Eastburn of Linda Eastburn YouTube channel, and I have a new book out called Threshold to Encounters. It's about 40 years of research and experience with all of these wild cryptids that many of you I know have encountered yourself. You can find it on Amazon.com. So when people send you these casts and you do the forensic research on the cast and present that, what types of things are you looking for and how do you analyze that?
So for me, the first thing that I'm looking for is first, are these dermal ridges? I got to make sure they're not artifacts. Are they consistent with the type of stuff that I see at work on my daily basis? And when I find them, the second thing that I'm doing is, are they congruent with the morphology of the foot or the hand? Like, are these ridges in a place or going in the direction where they should be going on that particular item? Like on the side of the foot, like the Onion Mountain cast, they had those artifacts that were running vertical on the side of the foot. Well, a well-instructed fingerprint examiner would have been able to look at that and immediately tell you, I'm sorry, these aren't ridges. They don't run on the sides of the foot. They actually, if they're going to be any vertical, they're going to be in the center, but not typically on a human foot unless they're higher up towards the center, towards the bald. But so I'm looking at those things. Are the ridges in the right place? Are they the right ridge density? The right width? Are they in the right place? And second, a lot of people I'm noticing through looking at these casts is they're picking them up before they're fully cured, and they're inadvertently depositing their own fingerprints or parts of their ridge impressions from their fingers on the underside of these casts. And they actually don't even know they're doing it because you'll see them like, ridges running this way and then running this way, and they can't go at a T intersection like this, right? So I'm seeing a lot of overlap. Um, and then there's the once I verified that, hey, there is a real possibility here, it's time to rule out all the other creatures in the forest, right? Um, you can't just, this blanketed statement, and I'll use this as an example of bears don't have dermal ridges, so it can't be a bear. Well, what a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't realize this until I started getting into this, is you have these blanketed statements that the people are using of bears don't have dermal ridges, so they don't look into it any further. Well, I knew they have something called the dermal papillae, which is kind of like the underside of like a dog's paw, where they grow in peg-like formations. And I was looking at my dog's paw, and I was noticing that her dermal papillae, when they grow long, if they have, if she's been inside too long, they actually grow up and fold over, kind of like hair. So I started wondering if when I depressed her paw into the mud, would it look like, would they continue and look kind of like ridge formations? Or would it be very evident that, minus the shape of the dog's paw, would the shapes of, those minute details mimic ridges? So I started doing bear research, and I quickly found out that they don't have. Well, there's the bears are something unique. I thought it was going to be something as simple as just getting some pictures, which apparently is very hard to do. You'll find online a lot of pictures of the bottom of bear paws that are um, great, but then when you zoom in, they become pixelated, and you can actually see those dermal papillae that are on the bottom. Uh, So I started ordering all the different casts and everything I could of bear paw prints, which really didn't help much except for give me an idea of, size comparisons, things like that. But I reached out to several different bear sanctuaries who've been helping me get pictures of the bottoms of these bear pads so I can eliminate these guys from possibly some casts. And what I found, and only one research paper ever really mentions this, and it was written back in the 70s, I think, 70s or the early 80s. And this biologist talks about how when the bear goes into their denning cycle, which I was quickly, I'm sorry, I was just thinking about the moment when I was talking to the bear people, and they quickly corrected me on it is not hibernation, it is torpor, Torpor, where they basically just slow down. So it turns out that the bears during their denning cycle, they actually lose their pads. They shed their pads and they start again for their next year, which I didn't know this and it's fully fascinating because I had assumed that we wouldn't be finding anything that would look like a dermal ridge because of their calloused pads. You know how they harden over and get calloused and they wouldn't leave any marks. But it turns out that during the first few months when they're coming out of that denning cycle, that they're actually walking on very fresh pads. And they actually do have um, little minute markings that look very similar to friction ridges. And when stepped into a type of substrate that can leave a good mark, it's looking like they can be confused with dermal ridges. So right now, the bears are going to be coming out of their cycles pretty much right now and into March. And I've got 3 or 4 places lined up who are going to help me get some really, really good pictures of these things so I can actually do some real comparisons. And the main reason I'm doing all of this, and I know that was a long explanation, but the reason I'm doing this is I don't have an actual exemplar of a Bigfoot foot. And that's like, a known sample that I can press into any substrate and see what it looks like. So if I don't have a known sample from a Bigfoot, then I have to basically eliminate all the other possibilities. And still in the end, it's just going to leave it as all right, we eliminated human, we eliminated bear, so that leaves us with something unknown, which I still think would be fascinating. And that's what I'm attempting to do. If I can eliminate these other things off a certain cast, then that might lend some more credibility to some of these casts that I've been looking at. Because some of the ones I've been given are up for debate or in hot contention. So that's where I'm at with that.
Is there any other animal in the woods that you know of um, that could compete with the foot of a Bigfoot, though, other than a bear?
Just humans.
You know,
No, no, it's just going to be bear and humans. I belong to which is weird to even say, but I strike that weird comment, please. uh, I ended up joining this group to see what it was like to go out into the woods and see what other Bigfoot people were like, stuff like that. Anyway, there's someone in the group who has a size 16 shoe, and for the life of me, never thought I would run into somebody with a size 16 shoe. But because we were walking through the woods and he was up ahead of me, and I literally stopped in my tracks and I said, "Okay, who's walked over here?" And he says, "Me." And I said, "What size shoe do you wear?" And he's like, 16. I said, "Would you do me a favor and take your shoe off?" He's like, "No." But yeah, bears, humans. If you eliminate those two, you're pretty much going to be left with hoaxing, which is hard to prove because I've seen a couple where there are bear tracks with manipulation. It's kind of like, oh, I have this big track here. All I have to do is manipulate the rest of it because the mechanics of that bear's hind foot look very similar to a human's. And with some subtle manipulation, you can make some of those impressions look pretty convincing. I think the problem is the documentation before the cast. I think that's one of the biggest things,
well, that's
and
what
the
I was
proper.
thinking. When we made the film Byways of Bigfoot, We were along a river that was known for some activity out there. And we went out one early, real early one Saturday and filmed, and no one knew we were going there except me. And I hadn't been out there. So there were some bluffs that we heard some noises. One of the individuals in the film had heard a noise back there a little bit earlier. So we made our way up to this bluff area, and there was this kind of strange limb of a tree, not just a limb, it was the whole tree. It was, maybe around 10-inch diameter of a tree. And it was twisted, just completely twisted and down. Nothing else around there looked to be damaged or windblown or anything like that. And there had been a storm the night before, so the ground was wet, and you would think, if there was damage, like wind damage or whatever, you would have seen something else around this tree limb. But just below that tree limb, there was a portion of a footprint, and you could see the toes. You could see kind of half of a foot, but we didn't know for sure if it was a Bigfoot, of course, or not, but it was close in proximity to this twisted tree, and in an area where a lot of people have said that they have witnessed Bigfoot back
Mhm.
there by those cliffs, in that particular area. So would, like you said, a combination of information that comes in together, like the twist, the fact that it was a little bit muddy and it was a storm the night before. I don't know if a human would have been out there. It was cold as well. It was kind of cold, for a barefoot person to be up there climbing around near those bluffs right after a storm. It could have been, yes, of course it could have been, but no one was around, when we were there. So what would you make of all of that evidence coming together at one time?
So I approach these kinds of things the same way I would if I was building a case and I was going to have to go stand in a court of law and testify to these things. And in doing so, the way we prepare is try to think about all the different ways that the defense is going to come after us, right? So while you were telling the story, that's exactly what I was doing. I was thinking, okay, well, how would somebody combat what I'm giving to you in court? But also, you have to keep in mind for me, giving stuff in court is I'm just presenting the evidence, and unless you've given me as or tendered me as an expert witness, I can't give you my opinion. But easily, I think um, you said a 10-inch diameter tree. That's a pretty large tree, and for it to be twisted, that took a lot of force. So my first thought is the defense is going to hit me up with you just told me there was a storm the night before. Can you 100%? Because we're going to look at each one individually. And my first thought is um, there was something wrong with the tree. Sometimes when trees are beginning to grow, and I've just started researching trees, which is not fun, I'll go ahead and tell you. Never thought I'd be research because I've been looking at these tree bends and studying tree arbor. Anyway, it turns out that we don't know the history of the tree, right? We don't know the history of the trees that surrounded this particular tree. So when it first started growing and it was an inch to 2 inches, 3 inches in diameter, what were the surroundings like? When it grew up, did it start to bend towards the sun and sometimes twist? I forgot the name of it, but there's an actual name for the twist. And it can severely weaken that tree. So a big, thunderstorm with wind comes down and hits that open area next to the water where wind can just flow through. I was just recently up at the Cohuttas. Well, not recently, but last spring I was up in the Cohuttas, and a giant storm had come through, and it made trekking through that forest uh, horrible. It was horrible with all those packs. There was trees down everywhere, bent trees, and it immediately reminded me of all these uh, pictures I see online of people saying, "Look, I found a bent tree." And I'm looking at all these bent trees and I'm saying, well, it's easy to tell me now, and I get that you just found it, but I'm just going on a little tangent here. But it's easy to say now that a storm came through and I can see that it's damage. But a lot of these trees don't go upright again, right? And they continue to grow. And stay in their bent formation. And then later on, it's going to look like nothing ever happened. And now I'm going to have a bunch of bent trees in the woods with stuff on top of them because from the storm before. But I would have to take each one of those things separate because you said it was not a full length foot, because now I can immediately go bear. And then we make the argument, and I say, well, prove to me it's not a bear. Prove to me the storm didn't do this. And now we have a problem. Because, I mean, and you're not wrong. You should be taking in all the different bits of evidence that you can and looking at them as a whole. You should always be doing that. But when you start breaking down each one individually, is sometimes where the thing can fall apart. And the way we approach things is we're not trying to build the case with on the CSI side. The detectives, yes. CSI side, it's what is the evidence telling me, and what does each piece of the evidence mean, on its own. You have to take all of those things into consideration. So I can't. It's almost like selectively grabbing all these bits of information and then coming to the conclusion you want it to be. That can be fairly dangerous, especially if we approach that way. So it's collect everything, note. I mean, you have to take notes on everything, document everything, and then when you put it all together, it is or it isn't. And it's one of our famous sayings. Evidence is what it is. There's nothing we can do about it. Because there's been many times where we've approached it this way and for the good ended up, proving the detective's main suspect. They didn't do it, right? And there's nothing you can do about that. So sorry, start over, go again.
Exactly.
I like to think I don't have a dog in the fight. And that's where I try to keep my mind when I'm looking at these things, because the moment I choose a side, I'm now biased. And that's one of the biggest problems I've been having is trying to keep my mouth shut. And like, I want to argue the point of trying to stay unbiased, but I'm having a hard time since I started doing this with people even allowing me. It's like they want me to pick a side.
I would imagine that's true, because there are just so many strong opinions about Bigfoot and Bigfoot evidence and things like that. I know when we were doing byways, honestly, it was our first time going out and filming and in all of these locations, and I didn't think we would find anything that would even remotely indicate that there was a Bigfoot there. I mean, I know there have been some reports in this area, and we filmed along a stretch of the Niangua in several different locations, including some private property where we found some evidence. But nothing, definitive, but still some evidence that indicates there's a possibility that, there could be some Bigfoot activity out there. I think for us on this one was the fact that you could actually see 5 toe prints. And that was real
Hmm.
clear. So I think it either had to be a human or a Bigfoot, rather than a bear, just because it was the toes were so clear. And it was kind of on a hillside. So that's why like the heel didn't actually touch down like and form much of a print. It was more like just the toes and the front portion of the foot, whether it be human or Bigfoot, either one. But the tree itself, it wasn't just twisted, it was twisted over and broken. And we looked for any evidence of storm damage, and anywhere else around there, anything else that could have, and we didn't find anything. That's not to say that this wasn't storm damage, but we just didn't find it. But that's about the sum total of the type of things that we knew to look for.
Hmm. I think when you find things like that, I think one of the approaches that I've noticed that even, my group, I think, I was thinking when I was out with them, number one, there's too many people walking together. And just from having been, an ex-turkey hunter, one of the things I used to do is um, you go out and you scout for like half a day by yourself. You would find out, follow them until evening when they roost in the trees. And then you'd mark the spot where they were roosting because the goal was to come down and get between them, the females that are up in the tree, and the male that was further, away and up a tree, usually about 100 yards or so. And your goal was to leave and then sneak back down there in the morning and the night and be there when they woke up for when the tom would come down out of the tree and go towards the females. So I spent a lot of time in the woods by myself at night, and it was very difficult, to stalk deer, stalk turkey, and then I see people moving through the woods in giant groups looking for something that's very, very difficult to find or, even get evidence of. I haven't quite figured out how that one works yet, but I think that when they do find something like, say, your footprint or your tree, then it should be treated as a crime scene. We're talking about an possibly, an undiscovered primate or an undiscovered animal or an undiscovered whatever side of, Bigfoot beliefs you fall on. Um, and it seems like a lot of the researchers aren't treating it that way. It's more they're going out and looking for experiences rather than trying to document the existence of an actual unknown primate, if that's what you want to call them. So, for instance, if I would find a footprint, I would immediately, back away the same way I walked in and start conducting like a perimeter search of the entire area. And, the whole thing would be blocked off. Only one person, in and out on that exact same path that I walked. We'd mark it, we'd photograph the whole thing, and then look for other evidence, treat it like it's a scene, and slowly work your way back in, because you don't want to damage anything else you might find. And then you have to decide, like, what are we really after? Are we here to do research? Or like, are we going to be gathering eDNA? Are we going to be, soil samples? That tree, is there a place on the tree that looks like it was grabbed? Are we going to be swabbing it for DNA? Um, are we going to photograph it, 3D scan these images first before we just start dumping casting materials in and taking the cast as a souvenir? Because one of the things I've been wondering about is all these people out there who have a tremendous amount of casts. Who is actually analyzing these casts and looking at them, to get more knowledge? Or are these truly just, experiencers and we're just collecting souvenirs in the woods? That's kind of where my mind has been lately, because it just dawned on me the other night when I was, thinking I was helping people by putting this book out there on how to cast different things. And then it dawned on me that I don't really understand why, like who's analyzing these casts and who's checking their work. Because I'm a big proponent on not relying on a single expert. Like I fully anticipate, or I'm hoping that once I start releasing some of my findings on some of these casts, that someone in my own field actually reads my stuff and puts me to task if I made some errors, because that's where we should be doing that kind of thing.
So are you're teaching people at this point in time to approach their evidence like a crime scene? And how does one go about learning that from you?
Well, I've released some videos, here and there, here and there. And originally I was going to, make a YouTube channel similar to yours, right? But um, the main job that I still have keeps getting in the way of making it an actual, a reality of time to be able to do this kind of thing. Um, I do have Friday and Saturday and Sundays off, but I'm on call for half a month at a time, which I get called out on a regular basis. We also are assigned to help other agencies and help teach other agencies. So we do a lot of agency assists, that's what they call it. So I'm fairly busy just at work. But the original premise was to start the YouTube channel so people could actually look at, like how to document your scene, photographically the correct way. Little minor things that I've noticed. So I've seen a lot of people, like they pull out their forensics kit on YouTube or TV shows even, and they say, "All right, we're going to collect, this swab," and I see them reach into their front pocket and pull out their gloves, right? And my first thought is, well, those are contaminated as all get out. So when somebody says, This sample is coming back as, there's human DNA in it, um, or it's been contaminated, and you try to say, no, I was wearing gloves, but we have on video of you pulling it out of your pocket. It's kind of hard to say that you didn't contaminate your own scene already. So, simple little tactics, of how to put gloves on, how to collect these samples. And the problem is too, is who are you going to send them to once you've done it? I know that's a huge problem, right? I don't have a good answer, but if you're collecting it, how to store it properly, little things like that until you're able to get it somewhere where you're trying to get it to. But I don't have a great answer for who's going to be doing the analysis of these casts. Because right now it would seem that the big name people pretty much have a monopoly on somehow authenticating these casts as either real or fake or not real. And I'm confused now after having looked at several notable ones on how these people are doing that. Um, so I'm very confused. I have an idea, but I'm not going to go into speculating on that kind of thing. But maybe you can shed some answers. You've been in this long enough.
Not on the analysis end of it, unfortunately, mostly just hearing a lot of really great stories from people. When you went out with that group, though, and not just to single out that group, but I'm sure that there was a lot of observation that you had, not only in the way that they approached the scene, but maybe what they needed to do, what they maybe needed not to do. And it's kind of a lack of knowledge of how to maybe get more information, more specific information that would help them to analyze something that they found. But it's also an attitude, like you said, that they're out there to have an experience more than they're out there to gather evidence. So what did you notice specifically that would be helpful to a group who really wants to go out and find something?
I would treat it more uh, like it's we're not going out. We're going out here to work. That's, I think, the mindset that I would, at least be able to say, we're going out here to do a job. We're going out here to work. We'll have some, downtime. You call it downtime, but I would have something like what we would call an ops plan. Not a, so we're in this area and we're going to go walking and we're going to go looking. I think that's a no-go. I think, we need to be ahead of time before you even get there. Someone needs to be formulating an ops plan, be kind of like a team leader. Um, you need to be looking at your topographical maps, have already scoped it out, with your satellite imagery from, online, however you want to do it. And you need to figure out where your game are running, or whatever your beliefs are of where you think these creatures may be. You need to have a definitive plan, like a targeted approach, and you need to have this done, ahead of time. And you need to go there with the understanding that we're here to do a job, and we're going to have some downtime. We're going to have some fun later. But right now, let's break into our groups. Like this group is going to go to this uh, whatever area you're going to go to, whether you believe you should be sitting in a valley and being observed, or you're going to go deploy trail cameras, or those long-term listening devices. Where are you going to deploy those? Why are you deploying them there? Not just deciding I'm going to put them up at various places because it's spread out, but is there a reason you are actually deploying these things where you're deploying them? There should be, not just willy-nilly, putting up listening devices and trail cameras throughout the woods. There should be a reason why you're putting them there. Um, and you should be taking advice from, hunters who would know game if you're believing that the Bigfoot are tracking deer during that time, and someone who can find those deer trails. A lot of times deer, they come in and they have a kind of like a giant intersection. Is that a good place? So someone needs to go scout. Someone needs to go scout. Someone needs to, do all these things. But um, because I could think, I mean, even my group, just when we went camping and went turkey hunting, when I left during the, right after lunch to go out and find this turkey, my people at my camp knew what I was going to go do. Now, granted, we were in an area that we had somewhat cell service, but just in case something happened, um, I left little, what is it called, flagging tape, on a branch, just out, right when I was about to get out of sight, I'd put another piece, and I marked them with a circle so they couldn't be. Uh, I'm sorry, I marked them with a circle so they couldn't be mixed up with any other hunters' flagging tape they put out on a trail. So if I didn't come back when I normally came back and they couldn't raise me on my phone, then at least they knew how to go in the direction of where I was. So at least, there's always some type of plan, safety plan, planning ahead for your operation. But I would treat it more, more planning than going out and just wandering the woods. It feels kind of like a wasted time, a waste of time, just wandering around. I feel like you need to pick and choose your locations, or like, why am I walking this ridge? Is it because I have good line of sight? I'm going to be able to hear things from a long distance from right here. Like, why am I here? And I think I have a lot of those questions when I go out with, some of these groups. Is I don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing with these people, or why they're chosen to do this for a particular reason. No one's really communicating. No one's saying why. It's kind of like sometimes, the explanation I get is sometimes if we just go and sit here, things happen. I'm like, that's not good enough for me. I might as well just go to camp. I'm not just going to, I've sat in the woods for long periods of time by myself in the woods, and nothing ever happened. Now, I have had other things happen. I've had two or three experiences in the woods at night on the way back to camp, but those times again, I look back on it and I can't find the pattern or to be able to figure out how to recreate it. So, that's what I'm not, I'm looking for. I think I got lost in my answer. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I think I got
I'll give
lost
you a
in my
new question.
answer.
I'll give you a new question. We can get a fresh start here.
Thanks.
So I know that you're really into the foot casting, analyzing that. What about sounds that people hear? And you did kind of touch on that here, but there's just so many extraordinary sounds. There's the Sierra sounds that have been recorded. There's lots of chatter, howls, wood knocks, things of that sort that tend to be semi-consistent in certain areas, and some people put a lot of validity into that. What would you think of that?
Well, I think that's a great follow-up question for where I was thinking about patterns, because that's one of the things that we're always looking for, right? What's a pattern that keeps happening over and over and over that might give us some information. Um, I don't have a good explanation. I've had some people contact me and tell me about way up north when it's freezing, sometimes trees crack and they make these noises. I don't. That's not. There's no doubt that that happens, but that's not good enough for, say, right here in Georgia, where I've heard a tree knock, um, and it sounded like, and that's what I did. That I did an episode on, is it owls playing baseball or whatnot? Because I found out that owls can clack their beak and make a sound that's similar to a tree knock, and I didn't know this. And I wish somebody had told me, because that ended up having an issue with, I left a recorder in the middle of the woods and I got what I thought was a tree knock. And then it dawned on me that if this particular owl, because I did hear some eastern screech owls chattering about in the background, and I thought that if one flew close enough and clacked its beak, then technically I can't tell you how far away, even though the owl's, when it makes a little clack with its beak, it doesn't, it's not as loud as a tree knock, right? But then it dawned on me, but what if it was really close to my recorder and it sounded, like, and then I realized that I really don't know much about audio analysis, right? To be able to tell you, like distance, or if you can tell distance. But I have heard what I thought was a tree knock in the woods without the recorder. and it sounded like that typical sound that people talk about of like a baseball hitting a baseball bat. And my first thought was, "Oh my God, was that a tree knot?" Right? And like I do, I analyze and obsess over, trying to figure out what it could have been. And I think I'm now on the camp that it's a vocalization, and I don't think it's a piece of wood hitting a tree. Only because one night I went out with somebody and I decided I was going to do a tree knock, and I can't tell you how many pieces of wood I picked up and hit a tree. Couldn't make that sound. Branches would break. Uh, then it dawned on me that different sized trees are going to have different sounds. And then I was like, well, how the hell are these tree knocks getting that same baseball on baseball bat sound every time? And then I was like, well, it must be vocal then, right? Is it vocal? And then I checked around, and apparently that's been an ongoing theory forever. I just didn't know. No. So, and I was like, well, that's kind of where I fall now. I don't think that the Bigfoot are walking around with pre-selected branches and they just carry them around with them all the time in case they want to hit the right kind of tree to make that sound. That doesn't seem plausible to me. But I also don't know why it seems as though when people talk about doing tree knocks, that if they get an answer that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but if does it seem like as soon as they get an answer that all the activity stops?
Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just
Oh,
starts
okay.
things. So there's a lot of mixed pieces of information about that.
Hmm.
But it seems like the knocks, the howls, sometimes people will make a howling sound and you'll get a far distant howl that comes back, but then that starts some kind of a communication that seems to be very distant in the woods from different directions, where these howls will start coming from different directions. So sometimes that happens when someone is initiating some kind of a sound, either a wood knock or a howl, either one. And then lots of times there's a howl and you get absolutely nothing that comes back. So, but sometimes a few times I have heard of witnesses that will hear a howl, and then there's, maybe off to the right or the left, there's another howl that comes in, and sometimes they start getting closer and closer and closer, like they're
Hmm.
kind of coming into camp, closer to them. That's rare, but it has been discussed several times by a few people. And so there are different modalities that it seems like people use to make some form of contact. And some people just sit there and wait and let them come to them. And when they do that, there's usually not an initiation of sound at all. It's just there's going to be a rustling in the trees, maybe a visual or a slight visual of some sort. So that happens as well. But you've heard the Sierra sounds. Now that's a whole different ballgame than a wood knock, of course, because that's actually a type of possible language. It sounds like a male, a female, a child, and they're conversing in some fashion or some way. And of course, we don't know if that's Bigfoot because there was no visual evidence that that was Bigfoot, but it was something that got recorded. What are your thoughts on that?
I would love to know, just from having recorded things out in the woods myself, with our current type of technology, I would love to know exactly how close they were and what kind of recording equipment they were using, because that seemed like they were like right there with them.
Yeah,
Um,
it was the 70s, I know. So, they didn't have
yeah.
as sophisticated equipment as they do today, but it was some kind of a small handheld recorder is what they had. That was placed outside of camp, and it was just recording. So, and they were able to capture it more than one time. That not to the degree that most of what you hear is, but still there's some sound there that was that kind of chatter that was going back and forth. They got quite a length of time. I'm not sure exactly how long it was. They took it back. They put it on a reel to reel, and then from there they had it analyzed with as much sophistication as they could by different people from different analysis. Now when I came into knowledge of it, it was just a couple of years ago, and Scott Nelson, the linguist, the naval trained linguist, had a copy of it, and was analyzing it, was able to slow it down when you could actually detect the various tones and the male, female, the child, that sort of thing. So, but given the 70s, given that, it was a handheld piece of equipment, don't know how far away the beings were that was making the sound because they didn't see them. They don't know. But it was definitely loud.
Yeah, I've heard of Scott Nelson and his findings. I like I said before, I don't know anything about how to analyze audio. Um, I would like very much to have an independent person of the same skill set be able to analyze it and then do a comparison between their findings to see what that might yield. I think that would be pretty fascinating. Um, but as far as I've never heard anything like that in the woods. I've heard a weird hissing sound that followed me one time when I was turkey hunting, and I never figured out what that was. Um, I've seen lights in the woods at night and also been trailed by a person. I thought it was one of my own people that were messing with me off to the side. Um, but that was at the same time that I was seeing a red light. Um, I've seen a red light twice in the woods, and that was kind of unnerving. One time, luckily, I was at camp and I wasn't by myself. I was with my brother and his and my nephew, and it was pretty funny. We were just sitting there, and he was 10 years old, his first time camping, and he says, "Uncle David, what's that?" And I looked over, and I thought it was somebody with a cigarette in the woods, like that little burning cherry at the end of the cigarette. Um, but it was moving so fluidly, and it was red. It was like a red LED light, and it was just moving between the trees, and it just kind of moved and left. And that was pretty interesting. And I've seen that same red light one other time when I was about a quarter down from the Valley Ridge, and I was walking on the trail coming back to camp, and I had something, or I thought was one of my friends, walking next to me, and to the back and right of me, but further up on the top of the ridge. And I was looking down into the valley, and I was looking at that same kind of red light I had seen before, and I thought that they were messing with me. And um, I yelled the typical, like guy thing, if you're messing with me, it's not good to mess with someone in the woods at night with a gun, that kind of thing. And I ended up doing the worst possible thing when I was finally able. At one point, I stopped and I rested up against a tree to listen, and then I didn't hear anything. The red light was now gone, but the footsteps had stopped, and when I started up again, it started up again. And then I did that dumb thing when I finally got close enough and I could see the glow at the top of the trees from the fire at camp. I said, "Screw it," and I just sprinted into camp. Which I realize, everybody, that that is the worst possible thing to do at this point, because um, but it was walking like a person, so I figured I could outrun this person. If they weren't going to shoot me, then at least I could get into camp. Uh, my sergeant friend had a lot of jokes about that when I came in, so that was pretty funny. But those are my only real experiences, aside from that weird hissing thing that followed me from valley to valley. I kept trying to move to get away from it, but it always come up behind me, and you just hear this loud "Sss," and still don't know what the hell that was. But I would move from one valley to the next, and it would still get up behind me and do that. And I don't know what that was. But those are my only real experiences, and that's why I never completely wrote off um, the possibility of Bigfoot. Is because I've had some weird stuff happen in the woods that I can't explain. I'm not attributing them to Bigfoot, but if I can't explain them, then I'm going to leave that as an open possibility to maybe, there's other things I don't understand or I can't explain. So I'm at least leaving the door open. So I'm hoping that at some point, if I can get it out there enough, that maybe somebody does send something across my desk that I can go, "Ooh, wow, I can't explain that. That's amazing."
Talking about the hissing sound, I've had several people report a kind of mechanical, and they describe it somewhat as hissing, but somewhat like maybe a drill, that, and it kind of winds down or winds away. But it's a little bit of a high pitched mechanical sound, but could be something maybe natural in the woods. But as a matter of fact, I just did an interview yesterday, and these guys were in a camp, and they heard it directly in front of them. They went over they all could hear it. It was from some distance, but then it would move to, another area, and they would go over there and listen to it. And it was like it was playing with them. It seemed distant, but they could all hear it. And then Ron Moorhead also had a very similar type of sound. It was a mechanical type of sound that was a buzzing, and it would come and go in different locations. In the middle of the woods, that there is nothing, no one, no person, nothing is anywhere near them. So they know it's not another campsite or a house or close by or anything like that. Very unexplained. Some insects, of course, create a hissing kind of sound, but it was.
Now,
Mhm,
this hissing sound was like steam being let off, like under pressure. It
mhm.
was like really loud. It would go,
Yeah,
and
and wind down. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's strange. But that isn't something that's very uncommon for me to hear about strange, unexplained sounds. And of course, at the Sierra camp, Ron Moore talked about being in his little like hut and hearing just this commotion outside. Sounded like the entire camp was just being destroyed, pots and pans just being thrown, and just a whole slew of noise out there. And the next day gets up and assumes that the camp is just going to be destroyed, and nothing, absolutely nothing is
Huh.
moved. Nothing. So there's a phenomena that also kind of accompanies some of this oddity that deals with sound of some sort.
Oh, I meant to tell you, those weird things, getting together with these groups is a good thing. You sit around, you tell stories. And there was one particular story that I told them, but I didn't realize that when I was saying that this had been a known thing. Um, I thought I was just telling them a funny story about us being out in the woods, and we thought somebody had snuck up on our camp when we were sitting around the fire listening to music and talking. And it's the end of the night. We're getting ready to have a few drinks, and a friend of mine leans over and he looks at me and he gave me the signal, like he goes, "Did you?" And I was like, "What?" I didn't know what he was saying. And he basically again told me, he goes, like, "Listen." And he was telling me that he heard somebody in the woods behind us. And then I did hear it. I heard the steps. And we did the 1, 2, 3, and we both jumped up, and the third guy jumps up, and we both basically ran out, split off into the woods. We had flashlights. We were chasing. You could hear the footsteps running. And I remember when we were running, and my friend told me the same thing that later we were thinking, how the hell is this guy who was so close to camp? How come I can't see him with my flashlight? And number two, how is he running through the woods so fast without running into a tree? Because that's what I was thinking. I was like, how is he doing this? And when we stopped so we could listen, because we were like, all right, stop, 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 stop. And we were trying to listen. We heard a car door shut. And it was very, very confusing because my friend immediately pulls up his phone and he's looking, at the aerial view. And he's like, dude, there's no road. And I said, what? Give me that. And we looked, and we couldn't figure out why we heard a car door shut in the middle of the woods. There was no road. Uh, and then someone at my camp goes, oh my God, and two other people said they had heard other people say that they've heard car door shuts in the middle of the woods. So I was wondering if you had ever heard of such a thing
I have
as
actually, yes, I have heard
you
of
heard a car
or
door shut right
yeah,
in the
and all
middle of the
kinds
woods.
of noises and sounds and um voices, and just some things that I realize with sound sometimes we just want to identify it as something we know. But
Hmm.
those sound that and that's the closest thing we can identify it to, would be a car door shutting or something
Hmm.
like that. So sometimes that happens. But yes, I've done over 400 interviews with people who've had some form of experience with Bigfoot or done research with Bigfoot or something, and they all have some similar experiences, but some that are unique to just their experience. But I have been kind of blown away with a lot of the things that people, I think, honestly, have documented, and from their perception, which, our five senses are pretty limited, but from your perception,
Mhm.
that's the only thing you have to go with. This is what they've actually experienced.
Yeah, what is interesting is almost all of these stories come way before I even considered anything being paranormal or Bigfoot or anything like that out there, with the exception of the red dot thing. That just freaked me out.
Orbs
Still
in
don't
the
mind
woods
going
are
in the woods.
Yeah, orbs in the woods
I'm
are
sorry.
very common though. Orbs in the woods are very, very common,
Mhm.
especially in areas where Bigfoot is found or not. I don't know, no one's really been able to declare if they're actually related with Bigfoot or not, but seeing orbs in the woods, and also even lights and craft in the sky at times are also part of this. May just be because they're in a remote area. They're able to see things, but just some unusual phenomena like that does seem to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel uncomfortable in the woods at all. Um, my biggest fear prior to all of this was just running into bear. I had an abnormal fear of bear, but after doing all this research and being around them, I guess uh, it's helped a lot. So now I don't care. I was still in the woods anyway, but I was more afraid of the weird people that you run into in the woods at night, because that's happened a couple times where I've seen people and I wondered what the hell they were doing out in the middle of nowhere. In fact, that recently happened up in Big Frog Mountain. We actually went on one of my first expeditions with that group that I belong to, and we uh, we were just sitting there up on the side of a hill, and you could see the road where the car was. And out of nowhere, it was like 1 a.m. This flashlight turns on, looks at the back of my truck, and then turns off. And I went down there with my thermal and looked around and couldn't see anybody. So that meant somebody disappeared off the road and I never saw them. And that was a little creepy knowing that someone was, and I mean, we were way out there. Someone was on foot that deep in the woods and it was 22-degree weather. Um, I don't know much what to think of that, but I don't like that idea, especially being, 21 years law enforcement. And that meant someone was prepared to be walking around in 22-degree weather with a not to be found, which I don't like that.
Exactly, I can understand. Well, David, tell me once again, how can people find your book? Where do they purchase it?
Oh, it's on Amazon. It's on Amazon.
Give us the
Big.
title of the book again.
Uh, oh my God, I just lost my mind.
It's a
It's a casting Bigfoot evidence. It looks
Casting
like that.
Bigfoot Evidence on Amazon. Okay, so they should be able to
Yeah.
find it on there. Sounds like a good read. Anyone who's gets serious about gathering real information and doing the research correctly. So, well, I'm going to go ahead and end our interview now. I thank you so much for joining me, and I'll let you know when this comes out.
All right. Thank you. I
Okay,
appreciate
thank
it.
you.
All right. Bye bye.